Okay, so I want to set the scene for everyone because if you're listening to this, you are part of the resistance. We're recording this in 2020, but you might be listening to this from the future, and this is where it's most relevant. I mean, probably for you, just gonna guess. The year is 20XX. The world is ruled by megalithic corporate cabals intent on controlling humanity. The only choice is resistance, which means getting insanely swole, which means getting stronger. Finally, they've microchipped every single one of us. The vaccine has happened, and we finally can go back to our gyms and get strong. And so the question becomes, Eric, what are we going to do now? We've been so far removed from the gym. It used to be part of our routine. We used to all love missing PRs. We would go to the gym and then we'd write that lengthy caption on Instagram, coming up with 30 different excuses on why the humidity was off and therefore we misgrooved it and we missed the lift and we missed that sensation. So I think it would be pertinent both in 2020 and in the future when we're ruled by those megalithic corporate cabals in order to discuss how to get our groove back, how to get strong again, and get even stronger than we ever were before.
Well, the beauty of these chips that we have is that they also hook up to our ocular implant. And you can just, scroll down like this. You can do this,
watch. Very sexy.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those who didn't see it on YouTube, I looked amazing doing that. Just required, the right amount of blinking. You up the tempo, it scrolls up. You slow the tempo down, it goes down.
Looks very natural.
Yeah, no one would even notice in public, especially if you're wearing shades, as all the cool dudes do. And anyway, you scroll down to one of those megalithic corporations that's taken over, of course, after winning multiple legal battles, muscleandstrengthpyramids.com. And you can buy my program, and then you have everything you need to know. So I think we finished the episode.
Where can people find your sexy ass, Eric?
Again, just blink, 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 scroll down,
right.
muscleandstrengthpyramids.com. And that's the place where, the corporate overlords have not defeated me. It is the only small business left, so you better support it. It is tantamount to the resistance.
Yeah. It only earns a couple $1 trillion a year. It's just like you and I, right? Corporations are people too. Now, I do want to talk about your favorite topic today. You, which is my favorite topic, because your boy, I've been noticing, and I think this will be a neat parallel. We've had a lot of conversations, Eric, off air, on air, everywhere in between. And one of our favorite, okay, so we have a few cult leaders. If you're on video, you might notice one behind me. If you know who he is, then you're part of the cult. If you don't, that's okay. Anyways, we talk about getting strong. Of course, we want to be yakety yacked. But strength is kind of one of those things that are integral to the cult. And recently, I see my boy. He's doing singles. He's looking great. His sumo form, what's going on here? Making 240 kg look like nothing. By the time this is out, I know he's going to have done his meet and crushed it. So I'm speaking it into existence. That's what's going to happen. And I think it's neat, Eric, because one, in New Zealand, gyms were closed for a little bit of time. You also were removed from doing powerlifting, right? For a certain period of time. You're doing more weightlifting. You're also doing strongman. Couple that with the home workouts. Everyone could probably relate to where you started. And maybe a lot of people, it's been even worse around the world. To be serious for a second, a lot of gyms have been closed for months. Some gyms, 5-6 months. That's a long period removed from doing the big three. And for most of us, we do derive that satisfaction of hitting a new PR or at least being around our same strength. Our identity is kind of attached to what we could do in the gym. And so I think as a proxy, what you're currently not saying, hey, everybody copy Eric, but, being a coach of champions. And like I said, you're a coach of champions. I've shopped the champions between us. I know this episode is going to be chef's kiss. Just to talk about that, the journey of how to get back in the groove and then how to exceed where you were before. Because let me ask you this question. It's like, can we improve? Were we doing everything perfect? If there's really such a thing as optimal, it's like maybe by the end of this episode, you'll discover things about your training that you didn't know before that you can incorporate new tools in your arsenal to hit new highs.
No, that's good, man. I love the way you framed that up. So let me ask you this, Omar. Do you think it'd be helpful to give a little bit of background to flesh out what you were talking about for my situation?
100.
Okay, so I'll start at a reasonable place. I was born in April 1983 at Children's Hospital, Oakland, California. to a young barista named Bonnie and a ambulance driver named Timo. Okay, fast forward to earlier this year.
Fast forward to 1980, like fast forward to 1984. So I was one.
Yep. So there I was. Great year. The book in 1984 had just come out. That's actually not true. Okay, so fast forward to modern times. So I think what's relevant is that New Zealand, out of many of the countries, is one of the more fortunate ones. We've had 2 lockdowns. We had one that lasted for me about 8 weeks. If you guys recall, recently we had Dr. Ben House on. I was out in Costa Rica with him. Came back after they announced that you have to do some mandatory self-quarantine. So I had to self-quarantine for a week upon returning to New Zealand before we had a 7-week period where the gyms were closed and we were on lockdown. And then in August, it happened again for like 4 weeks. It wasn't nearly as long. And there was a transition of homes for me in that period where we didn't quite have our home gym set up because I was, I wouldn't have to deal with that because I'm also quite fortunate that I have a home gym now. But anyway, what this resulted in is that the plans and I'm going to say we purposefully here, had for 2020 had to change. We were supposed to be carrying rocks, getting bicep tears, pressing logs, and pulling trucks together in July. Unfortunately, the strongman comp that we were going to do, actually it would have been April. I don't even remember. They changed it from April to July. You couldn't leave the country. You couldn't come in. It got canceled. We were on lockdown. Nonetheless, my plans to do the strength trifecta, of strongman, powerlifting, and weightlifting, is currently it's going to be a dufecta, if that's a thing. And maybe I can sneak in some kind of other comp before the year's over and sort of accomplish my goal. But anyway, plans went away. Went on lockdown. Could not keep even training for strongman or powerlifting. So I had 90 kilos of weights, got really into improving my snatch and doing some weightlifting basically at the park or in my own apartment garage before we'd moved. And this led to, you know what, let me give a full crack at weightlifting this year and see if I can really improve my technical skill. Competed in August. Again, mid-prep, the second lockdown happened, so it didn't go great, but it went okay. It went all right. I had two meets, one in August and then one in October. 6 weeks after that meet, which would be 1 week from today in the past for you. Okay, I'm going to make this easy for you. Sunday, November 29th was or is, depending on when this episode comes out, my powerlifting meet, which was only 6 weeks after Masters Nationals, the weightlifting meet I did. So what do you do when you haven't trained for powerlifting specifically for a while, many actually years, I would say, at this stage, because I'll give a little even more background, and you're only 6 weeks out. So you both are a detrained powerlifter and dropped into the beginning of what is typically your intensification period. And I had to scratch my chinny chin chin and have a think. So we're going to go even further back. So now this has become like a Tarantino movie of my life, okay?
I love
we started in 83, briefly went to 84, jumped ahead to 3 months ago, and now here we are in 2017. So 2017, I finally decide I need to get this sucker done, and I got bilateral FAI surgery, had some of my bones shaved off, had 2 labral tears repaired, and it went fantastic. I had to recover over a period of about 16 weeks to get full like functionality, no pain anywhere. And I hit sometime in 2017 a 200 kilo high bar squat on the return, but I couldn't do any sumo deadlifting for a while. So the best numbers I've done back in January 2017, which was a month before my surgery, I pulled 250 sumo at a body weight of around like 98, I think, something like that. And I had also built up to a touch and go 165 bench. I don't know what my paused was. My best bench before that in competition paused was 150. My all-time best back squat 225 in training, 222 in competition. So I'm a mediocre power lifter. Really good numbers if I was I think it was the 63 kilo class or something like that.
If it was just 2012 still and no one else entered the fray.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we're talking 2012 or 4 weight classes below me, whatever 2 weight classes below Taylor Atwood is, that's where I would be competitive. So yeah, the question is now, okay, what have I done since 2017? Well, with the hip surgery, I recovered, but I was doing high bar, couldn't do a lot of sumo deadlift, haven't pulled heavy on sumo in a long time. Bench is still good to go, but then, I'm recovering into 2018. 2019, I do bodybuilding. So late 2018, most of my training was much more bodybuilding focused. Then I semi-starve myself and do mostly bodybuilding training. End of 2019, I get into strongman, get back into weightlifting, and then I already reviewed 2020. So it's actually been about 3 years since I've really effectively trained for powerlifting. It's not that I haven't been training though. So I haven't lost any size. Arguably, I've gained a little bit. And I certainly have been exposing myself to heavy loads in different ways. So what did I decide to do? Well, I basically just went directly into the lowest hanging fruit possible for an intensity phase. I am detrained, meaning I don't need to, if I jumped into doing 5x5 on a squat, a bench, or a deadlift, I would have just been wrecked. And it wouldn't have been beneficial. It would have been something that was far beyond what I could have recovered from. So one answer needed to be, well, this needs to be a progressive increase in stress starting quite low. And that's not some people see that as a bug. I see that as a feature. Because right now I'm going to say at the beginning of the 6-week block, I was able to gain strength very easily. My first single on bench that I did was 115. The first single I did on squats was 145. And the first single I did on deadlifts was 180. So those were all between a 4 to 5 RPE. What else did I do? Nothing. I did 1 back offset on squat and deadlift. And then 2 back offsets on bench for the whole week. So the plan was I started with what's called a 3-2-1. So I did 3 singles on bench, 2 singles on squats, 1 single on deadlift. I did a little bit of maintenance work on weightlifting, and then I did some bodybuilding work. So that was my 5 days. And then I just progressed this. So I went from a 3-2-1 to a 4-3-2 to a 5-4-3. So that was week 1, 2, and 3. So I'm just increasing these singles. The first week I was doing these around a 5 RPE. The second week I was doing around a 6 to a 7 RPE. The next week around a 7 to 8. And then week 4 is where things got pretty fun. So week 4, I was doing singles again. This is last week from where we're talking right now. Still doing the 5-4-3. And I'm basically going to a 9 to a 10 RPE every time. So I'm essentially doing like a Bulgarian-esque style on all lifts. Also, for the first 3 weeks, I progressed the back off work. So I went from a 3-2-1 to a 4-3-2 to a 5-4-3. And I went from doing 2-1-1 number of back offsets. So it means on 2 of those single days, I would do 1 back offset. I just did a set of 5 at around a slightly higher RPE than the week was. So if it was a 5 RPE single week, I did like a 6 RPE on the set of 5. And then I went 5-4-3. And then I've just been doing triples since week 3 as my back off work. And literally just 1 set. Now, a lot of people would look at that and go like, that's far too low volume. Even on bench, you do 5 singles, and then on 3 days, you do 1 more set. That's technically only like 8 working sets. But how many working sets was I doing before that? 0. I was weightlifting. So my bench went from, if you were to estimate it based on what I thought I could do, based on the bar speed of my singles, was probably around 130 at the start of the 6-week block. So far, I've hit a 147 max right now. My squat was probably around 170, 175. I hit 200. My deadlift sumo was probably around 210. And I recently just hit 240. So if I told someone, hey, I've been training, 16 years, and in a period of 6 weeks, I put 30 kilos on my deadlift, 17 kilos on my bench, and 25 to 30 kilos on my squat, they would say, oh, so you hopped on gear, right? But the reality is that I'm regaining strength. And I think that's a really critical thing to understand, is that these are grounds I've already walked. And one phenomenon that if you ask any lifter who's been in the game for a long time, especially if they've had an injury, if they've changed training types significantly, either due to injury or just because they like to compete in, let's say, I don't know, powerlifting, weightlifting, or strongman and powerlifting. Like if you were to talk to Alan Thrall about this, I bet he would totally agree. You'll notice that it takes very little to get back to where you've been or close to it. And this is something that I'm really glad I actually got that hip surgery, because This is the same thing I did when I started to get my squat back. I was worried about my hips. That's why I was squatting high bar, and I was also deadlifting conventional. I was nervous, and I didn't want to do a ton of volume on these basically new hips. Like they'd physically changed the structure of my bones. They had repaired my labrum, and it was not a fun experience leading up to that surgery or getting it or recovering from it. So I was erring on the side of extreme caution. So I was doing basically a single at a low RPE on my squats just to kind of rebuild that skill. I started very light. We're talking like 100 kilos high bar. And I just was shocked at how every time I stepped in the gym, I was able to squat more at a similarly mid-range RPE. And when I hit that 200, it was probably at 8.5, 9. And it happened over a 12-week period. So that experience really was a game changer for me. It made me realize just how much there's a certain amount of volume I think I have to do. There's a certain amount of work that I think I must do. There's a certain amount of regression I expect. And then there's the reality. So I think if you're in a unique place of regaining strength, and if you understand all the mechanisms of strength, so I haven't lost size. I'm still lifting a lot of heavy things with a lot of muscle groups. So, I've still probably got some other decent morphological adaptations that go along with strength. I've probably got pretty good lateral force transmission. I can probably have pretty high rate coding and high threshold motor unit and voluntary activation, all the good neuromuscular stuff. But it's not yet specific to a low bar meat depth squat, to a arched paused bench press, or a sumo deadlift. So if I've got a lot of those aspects, but not those specific adaptations, specificity makes sense. Now, the question would be, someone might go like, well, should I do singles? And I'd say, well, are you regaining strength? Are you 6 weeks out? Because the answer, if I said I had 12 weeks, would be that for 6 weeks, I'd be doing things like 5x5s, 3x6s, high bar squats, conventional deadlifts, feet up bench, things that are more likely to raise the ceiling on my strength. But the fact of the matter is that I basically started butted up against the ceiling right when we began this prep. And I needed something that would just accelerate it all up at the same time. And that's where specificity came in. That wasn't a great analogy, being butted up against the ceiling. I think more likely the ceiling would not move. Yes, ass up, face down, ass up,
Ceiling's
trying to figure out what to do. Yeah, I think probably a better way to put it.
You twerked it up.
Yeah, I twerked my strength. I think, yeah, so probably we got that's the title of this episode now, twerking your strength up. But no, in all seriousness, I think probably a better way to envision it is that I didn't have time to raise the ceiling, so I needed to do something just to lift me up to it as fast as possible. So that was a long answer to what seemed like a relatively short question, but I think an intensity block, if we really think about what is specificity? Some people will be like, yeah, I'm going to do like triples and some doubles and maybe a few singles here and there. I think that's great, and that's totally fine. But I do tend to think that when you are actually within a month or two of your prep, and if you've preceded that with volume work, and we can talk about what that is, because it probably doesn't match what everyone thinks it should be kind of traditionally. The thing that is going to give you the most preparatory skill for getting on the platform is going to be replicating that experience. But there's also logistical concerns. So I'm going to leave it there. We can flesh that out. There's some unique things I had to do in the last couple weeks. And there are things to consider when you do have more than 6 weeks. But ultimately, I think it's probably a good idea to expose yourself to doing relatively heavy singles when you're close to a meet. It just makes sense, right?
Eric, I think there's a whole lot there to unpack. And I think for the average lifter, sometimes they assume that their strength is static, that it's not expressed through movement in a particular point in time. So it's I did this was 500 pounds at a certain point in time. And I think, well, of course, I've been rusty, whatever, it's a month away or 2 months away, I should be able to replicate this. And one of the things that I saw, so when gyms opened back up in Toronto, everyone wanted to get to where they were immediately. And so there was an immediate rush to increase the RP. So start, sure, maybe with singles or with intensities. Like, so whatever, I left off squatting 400 pounds. Well, I'm sure I could work up to a single of like maybe 350, 360 because they want to shorten the way. But there is such a thing as momentum, kind of what you illustrated with your example of being 6 weeks out and you starting if you were to estimate your 1 rep max detrain 6 weeks out to where you are now, it's a lot lower, or it was a lot lower. It's 30 kilos. And so someone might take a look at just your numbers. So if they just saw week 145 kilo squat at RP5, they're like, okay, but all that happened, you did a 200 kilo squat at RP9. It's like all that happened is you increased your RP. It's like, no, not actually. I think the one of the subtle things that I liked is that you almost increased also the confidence in the movement, where the feeling of the weeks being light leading up to heavier weeks. So the idea of momentum being established, the skill acquisition, the confidence in knowing that I could do this, as opposed to week 1, you're kind of already hitting that wall where I saw, once again, a lot of powerlifters at Fortis where they're slamming into RP9 immediately. And there was no meat that they're trying to prepare for. It was just they wanted to shorten the way in terms of where they were currently and where they wanted to get back to be. And so that's one thing. I did also hear, Eric, if anyone can hear this, over the sirens that totally no one will be able to minimize because they're after us, Eric. We're giving too much good information here out on these streets. Is that you said a back off set of 5s. So what I liked is that when you got very specific, where you're like, okay, so I'm going to be doing some singles, I'm going to be raising the RP over time, is that you also, it wasn't a complete negation of any volume. So it's not like, oh, I'm just going to do singles, right? I'm still going to do a little bit of volume work, but I'm going to make it in such a way that I'm managing my overall fatigue. So week to week, I'm increasing the intensity, but I'm managing total fatigue. So I'm not entering into the meet feeling like hot garbage. And so I think there was a lot there. My question for you, if someone is listening to this, like, okay, so these are some insights as it relates to RP, momentum, where once you start out, the role of singles. Let's kind of expand then the horizon. So let's assume that an individual doesn't have 6 weeks. Let's assume that they're trying to get the groove back, but in reality, they might think there's no time like tomorrow. Like, meaning once again, I need to get to back to my strength to where it was ASAP. But let's assume they have a little bit more time. What does the picture look like then? And then what is the role of specificity as you lengthen kind of the time course of one's training? So instead of having a finite point, I must do a meet in 6 weeks, and therefore I have to focus on the big 3 almost exclusively. If we're to extend this for someone, gyms open up. So let's give a scenario here for the average listener that's probably relevant. They've been in and out of the gym for 6 months now, 6 to maybe 8 months. And we could assume once gyms open again, let's give best case scenario for everyone. They have maybe 6 months. Like, they have a good amount of time where they could rely upon gyms remaining open. How does the picture change when you increase that time course?
Great question. Yeah, and I think this is where, and I've talked about this before, we both talked about this. This is where power builders go wrong, quote unquote power builders. People who are interested in improving their big 3 and also, doing volume and getting big, right? They typically make one of 2 errors depending on, how they frame things. So if their goal is to get big and get strong, and they want to focus on the big 3 right now, they will do a lot of sets on the big 3. So, and this is not just something that power builders do wrong, but it's a useful conversation. This is the way powerlifters approach a volume block. The traditional way to approach a volume block is, okay, instead of working in the 1 to 5 rep range, we're going to work in like the 4 to 8 rep range, maybe even 10s. And we're going to use the big 3, and we're going to do more sets. We're going to drop the RPE a little bit, but we're going to do volume with our big 3. Now, I think if you're someone who has really good leverages, you're quite resilient to injury. If you're someone who is young, robust, and you find that you fall within the norms of technical, expertise with limb lengths and all that stuff, you don't get, wrist pain or elbow pain or shoulder pain doing low bar squat with a tight grip and then moving to, a wide grip bench press. You don't get, lingering back pain or soreness. Deadlifting, maybe you're a sumo puller, so you can stay a little more upright, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can think of all the people who just don't get the anecdotal experiences that maybe half of lifters do when they do a lot of volume on the big 3 at relatively high loads. If that's you, this probably isn't a problem. But I would say for, again, probably half of lifters, if you're going to go like 5x5 on squats, and then 5x5 on bench, and then do some RDLs, and then next day you just do some accessory work, take a day off, come back, and then you're doing
sixes or eights or whatever. But if you have like an undulating program where you're hitting each lift 3 times a week ish on average, maybe deadlifts less, maybe bench more, etc., and you're doing 5 to 8 reps for 4 to 5 sets most of the time, you're going to get really wrecked and beat up. And you have to ask yourself, all right, is that really that much more specific? Like, how close to a 1RM is a set of 8? It's not that close, right? And then you have to ask yourself, well, all right, well, at what point does this work need to be that specific? And is it just always the question of, is more specific better? So look at it this way. I think most people, they will narrowly look at specificity. They'll either look at it from a rep range perspective, or they'll look at it from a movement pattern perspective. But they struggle with combining those two concepts. So here are the two ways the power builders go wrong. I want to get strong, but I also want to get big. So I'm going to do 5x5 on tricep pushdowns, right? Or, I'm never going to go above 8 reps. Well, it's like, hold on. What is the purpose of the tricep pushdown? When we think about it from the strength perspective, do you really think that increasing your strength on a tricep pushdown is going to help your bench? You might say yes. I would suggest that I don't think that is going to have much transfer at all. Maybe a better paradigm is to think, hey, tricep pushdown is probably a better vehicle than bench press to make my triceps bigger, which might eventually help my pressing strength generally. Okay, so then the second question a power builder cares about, what's the biggest way to make my triceps bigger? Well, do a sufficient progressive volume with tricep movements. All right. So if I'm not getting any strength transfer and the goal is to make my triceps bigger, oh shit, I need to do tricep pushdowns basically like a bodybuilder. So we start to understand that blending these two and thinking about it just from a specificity of rep range is problematic. Like, I don't want to do 5x5 on every single movement like calf raises. It's like, nobody cares, right? Your goal is to get your calves bigger. Okay. But the other direction is true too, where powerlifters often go wrong. Like I was saying, do I need to be doing 5x8 on squats? What is that getting me? And do I need to put my belt on when I got the bar? All right, I'm going to wear my singlet, wrist straps on, just lifting 20 kilos, belt, give me commands. I'm going to pause each one because #specificity.
Right.
It's 20 kilos. In my case, that is less than 10% of my max. It doesn't matter how much I try to make 20 kilos like 200 kilos. I ain't fooling my body. It's different, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not benefiting from that. And ostensibly, the goal of doing this volume is to get the less specific general strength adaptations, to be able to handle that work capacity, to be able to increase my resilience to training, and to build muscle size, right, in the specific regions. So, okay, let's put it this way. How much better do we think sets of 8 are on a squat for squatting versus sets of 8 to 10 on a belt squat? You could make an argument that it's slightly less specific, but I would also say that what you might gain if you're among the 50% that gets pretty beat up from training of not loading your back might be well worth it. And then another question is, like you said, strength is expressed at a given point in time through a movement. So we don't actually care about how much transfer we're getting 12 weeks out on a belt squat versus a squat. Like, yeah, if all of a sudden you said, okay, today, who's going to be able to squat more? The person who did that set of 8 or the person who did the set of belt squats 2 days ago? Yes, the answer would be the person who did the squat. They're getting that motor pattern proficiency. But that's not why you're doing 8s. It's just slightly better than something that's slightly worse than it for the goal of squatting a 1RM in 48 hours. But your goal is to squat in 11 weeks in 48 hours from now to get on the platform. So the question really is, who's going to give a bigger number on the platform? The person who has a sore back because they did 5x8 on squats instead of belt squats 12 weeks ago, and it kind of was limping along through the start of a meet prep, not even just near the end where it starts to get pretty grindy, and you've got a taper to save you. But sometime in week 1 or 2, you're feeling beat up because you're doing high volume back squats. Or the person who started with a small amount of volume on back squats, but did most of their volume work on non-specific work, and then dropped the volume off and did more high intensity work on the main lifts. So that's kind of the paradigm I use. my good friend Bryce Lewis, I think, is actually competing on the same day as me, um, or maybe not. Are we a week apart? But anyway, Bryce was competing. Unfortunately, COVID led to canceling the meet, but he's going to do a live stream mock meet. And for the last couple of weeks, he's been doing some pretty damn heavy singles. But before that, he was doing like hammer strength chest presses, and he was doing belt squats in addition to some higher rep, lower load work on the big three. So there is a marriage here that can happen where if you commit to a camp, you're only right some of the times. So if you commit to this whole like non-specificity camp, and you just think of like when you hear someone doing singles, you're like, oh, that's bad. Like it doesn't matter that it's a 5 RPE. It's just all Bulgarian method. You're going to get hurt. You need to be on gear. Like all the tropes we hear, right? That like may be true. Like if we were to talk to Max Aida, who's been on here a number of times, he would tell you how he plateaued for long periods of time and just had no other options. And that eventually he started manipulating it to the point where he looked at him like, this isn't Bulgarian anymore. Why am I even staying in this paradigm? I've changed it so much. There is of course a role for volume, because doing singles makes it almost impossible to get a sufficient volume of training to get some of those morphological adaptations without killing yourself in the process. Like, what are you going to do? 30 singles at a 7 RPE? That's crazy, you know? So that if you commit to being a more Bulgarian-esque or high-intensity approach is good or is bad, you guarantee that you're wrong at certain phases. Because I think it is a very good thing to do when you're within close proximity to a meet, but it doesn't make sense if you're further from the meet. You need to get more volume at a lower intensity load. You're already not specific. Just because you're doing a single, like a single at a 5 RPE, it's specific-ish, right? But its role when you're 8 weeks out is more just to get an idea. It's for skill practice, and it's to set the stage for when you go to a 6 or a 7 or an 8 RPE. And you can see this. I saw a lot of confusion, even among people who knew. Like, I don't expect everyone to know that I'm 6 weeks out from a meet when they watch me do 145 as a single on squat and then rack it. And they're like, "What was that? Why did you post your warm up?" I'm like, no, that's all I did today. Okay, this science guy, he doesn't train at all. He's a moron, So I had people who were watching me 5 weeks ago just scratching their head and confused as to why I would put up what looked like your last warm-up single and then stop training that lift. Likewise, I've had people who are like, what's going on? It seems like you're working up to a 10 on all your lifts like multiple days in a row. Your book says that you should be training your main lifts between a 6 to 8 RPE,
Yeah.
And I think people have trouble holding the context and nuance to when you would be on either end of the spectrum. So I understand it's challenging, and I don't mean to denigrate any of those questions. They're good questions, and that's why we're having this podcast.
Eric, I think that was a clinic. What you said about power building or some of the tropes, I want to unpack a few things. The first is I would say to anyone listening in general, whenever you observe any lifter, any coach, basically anyone online, it's a good rule of thumb, that you're seeing merely a snapshot in, once again, a point of time, that it's not indicative of the general course. It also might be a little bit of information, might almost be misinformation in terms of you interpreting what you see. And I think you said a lot of very powerful things, because I think in the first place, it depends upon what stage of the journey you're at. How robust are you? All those variables that you have to consider. Where often you will see when it comes to power building, because there might be, I'm just going to call it a slight barbell bias. A lot of us, I'm going to throw myself in that camp. I love to squat. I love to bench press. I love to deadlift. They're very fun for me. So given the choice where it's like, hey man, would you rather squat or would you rather belt squat? Just personal preference, right? I want to squat. Cool. And as you said, Eric, when it comes to power building, well, I need to do so. The equation they're thinking in their head is I want to get stronger, so I need to practice the movement. I also need to do a requisite amount of volume in order to stimulate my muscles and allow them to grow. Cool. And so I can't get too far away from doing the squat. So why don't I just make up that volume with more squatting or more bench press or more deadlifts? And this might work once again for a time. And I think that's also an interesting conversation where you are in your journey. Because I think a few things that I would add is that absolute load matters. Meaning that if your squat, let's just say hypothetically, so program calls for a 5x5. Let's say it's at 80%. So it's like the final week, you're going all out, guts out, crying, blood vessels popping, cool. If you're squatting once again, maybe 100 kilos, or if you're squatting 80 kilos, like you're 1 year into your journey, you could really exert yourself at a true RP10. You could go balls to the wall. You might be a little sore, but the totality of the fatigue, what you'll feel throughout the week, you'll probably be pretty good in a few days. If someone was to do that, as you said, you coaching Bryce, if he was to do a 5x5 at his 80%, at whatever, 600 and some pounds, whatever the number would be, a lot more weight. So the absolute load goes up. The total fatigue that occurs from doing that 5x5 is markedly different. And so you will notice there are some, I think, general trends that you notice amongst successful lifters over time, and lifters aren't a monolith. Different things work for different people, but there are some of these clues that people believe. And so it's like, okay, well, wait a second here. I can't just follow this forever, right? I can't just make up all my volume with the barbell specific movements. Okay, so this is what you must do then. And so inevitably what I see from some individuals then is they'll go from a higher volume barbell biased approach to then a slightly lower volume, but still barbell biased approach if they're thinking strength specific, or they're leaning a little bit more towards strength as opposed to hypertrophy. I got it. So I'm getting beat up, man, doing a lot of squats. Let me reduce the volume and I'll keep that skill acquisition. And that's true and that's great. But it's almost, as you said, Eric, they're shortchanging themselves if they want to grow muscle. So now they're understanding one part, I'm doing too much of something and it's not working. So therefore, I must reduce it, instead of thinking to himself, oh, maybe, you know what, for myself, if I focus more on singles or a low volume approach on squats, and then I periodize it over a period of 12, 16, 24 weeks, where I might not do singles for the first little bit. I might even go to RP6, just like a 3x5. I start out on that. I keep the specificity of at least training the movement in some capacity, and then incorporate singles and so on and so forth, and make up the volume elsewhere. I might arrive to the platform in a better condition. And I think something that you said, something I often think in general, is if you were to roll the dice, or if you were to have this instance occur once again, how many times would this outcome be the same? So meaning, if you're to follow this program, what is it? There's an 80% chance that we're going to arrive on the platform feeling more or less okay. So there's a 20% chance that, due to the nature of the program and how we respond to it, we might actually not be okay by the end of it. That's a pretty high amount. If instead, however, like you said, a lot of just, simply put, individuals who've been around the game for a while, Bryce Lewis, and there's a lot of other recurring powerlifters, and you see they've found what works right for them. And I'm not trying to distill it really down into a neat little package. They found what works right for them. But it's like, well, wait a second. Okay, I want to do what will be repeatable long term. So I want to be able to train. I want to be able to train long term using some sort of methodology. And I want it statistically to be so that on average, I arrive on the platform feeling okay. And that's why, kind of more to the point, kind of a just humorous aside, we've noticed now in powerlifting almost what Abajev and the Bulgarian method, a little bit were some of the high fatigue debt programs where, some of the coaches that advocate maybe a little bit more intensity, a little bit more volume than other coaches. And those that respond well, respond great. And those that don't just get absolutely trash compacted. And I think there's something to be said about hubris developing over time. We're real quick before I pass over to you, because you said so many excellent points. I think you can expand on so many of them. Is that in 2014, when I first low bar squatted 500 pounds, I did the Bulgarian style, right? I was ultra specificity boy. I'm at Fortis Fitness. Sean, who owns it, he's a West Side coach. It doesn't mean that he coaches West Side, but it means that, we have all the things for either conjugate or different methodologies. Like, he just has a lot of things there that you can do. And so there's a lot of racks. And for myself, I was having a lot of fun squatting. I thought, hey, I'm just going to keep squatting. But guess what happened, Eric? I was getting stronger. I was doing the Bulgarian style, having a single and then some backup volume. But basically, most of my leg volume were squats and deadlifts. Then I started noticing a little nagging pain, right? I'm like, oh, my hips kind of bother me, or this is kind of happening. And what does a young man tell himself? Shut up and keep lifting, right? And I was perpetually in that camp. Well, of course, it's not quite weakness leaving the body, but this is either something temporary, or maybe, once again, I didn't sleep enough. I'm like, no, dude, you're doing 30 sets a week. Like that's your culprit right there. And then what's crazy, and I think we had this conversation for you, 2019, your bodybuilding prep, where you entered, I'm going to say, with your best package, but in terms of the effort that it required of you compared to other preps, it might have been a little bit easier. And in 2019, when I built it back, and it was nothing, so we worked up cool, got the 5-plate high bar, cool. It was a lot easier, not only because I'd already been there, but the approach vector that I took was one, it's like, okay, How can I get here with a very high chance of feeling okay? A lot more singles, a lot less volume. Made up the volume as we're talking about. I like Bulgarian split squats. That's just what I like to do. Different leg movements that feel okay on my body, for lack of a better word. And guess what? Arrived there on time, arrived there on point. It actually felt really good, which is surprising. It's like you almost think, Eric, you're expecting a battle sometimes when you're approaching new territories, and you almost welcome it. You're okay, it's gonna start getting grindy or whatever, and it doesn't happen because you actually just listen to yourself for a change and you value the inputs, and then you're surprised at what happens. So I think there's a lot to unpack, and I think I liked everything that you said, but in particular, the power builder paradigm that some people get caught up in, where it's either they're doing too much volume with certain movements, or when it comes time once again to do accessories or other movements. Well, wait a second, why would I do 3 sets of 15 on the tricep extension? That's not specific enough when it comes to getting my tricep stronger for the bench press.
No, I think you did a really good job of fleshing out some of the things I talked about, and you hit on a couple things that I want to expand on. One is the concept of consistency and predictability. So we'll start there. You talked about how you want to increase the probability that on game day you have a quote unquote good performance, something in the realm of that you'd be happy with based on your prep. Now, the thing I've noticed is that when you take a much more specific approach in the final weeks in your peaking block, where you're hitting maxes, multiple times, and let's say in my case, throughout week 4, week 5, and next week on bench for half the week, because I just don't take as long to fully recover on bench as I do on squat and deadlift. But like today, when we're done with this podcast, I'm going to hit my last max deadlift and squat, but it'll be my 4th or 5th in this training block. So I am pretty confident, based on having done this before and having coached a lot of people, that on a relatively average day, I'll be able to hit the highest numbers I hit in the time leading up. Because with the taper and with feeling better, even if maybe I didn't provide enough stimulus to get stronger, I'm absolutely providing enough stimulus to stay at the same strength, and then I can dump fatigue. And like if I got on the platform, and let's say today, later, once I get off this call, I don't do any better than a 200 and a 240 deadlift. I'm pretty confident that on game day I could squat 200 and deadlift 240, and that's really good. That's not great. I would love to do a little more with the taper, but I can have a lot more confidence in that than if the heaviest thing I did was 3x3 at my previous percentage of 1RM at 90%, and then taper and just hope it went well. I think the way I used to program is that the heaviest thing they would touch would be openers based on an estimated 1RM 1 week out, and then my message was pretty much always the same to the person. If they hit the openers and they felt hard, it's like, you're fatigued, don't worry, we got a taper. And if the openers felt really good, like, that's great, because everything worked up to this point. So it's like I was able to explain away no matter what was happening, either positive or negative. But the reality is that I didn't have a whole lot of confidence on what was going to happen a week from that point. But once I started making those intensity blocks a little more specific, so hitting some singles at 7, 8, and 9 RPEs, building up in the 3 to 4 weeks leading up into the competition, and at an increasing frequency with the reduction in volume, all of a sudden I could be very confident that we're going to at least get those second attempts. We're probably going to have a 6 for 9 day on a bad day. Now, is as maybe satisfying as the idea, not the reality, the idea of tapering and hitting PBs that you've never touched in training, but on the platform? No, but I don't see people let's put it this way. There are individuals who I've seen reliably do that. But I have not seen entire gyms, schools of thoughts, or paradigms, or swaths of people who all have a approach that results in the vast majority of their lifters who get on the platform and hit all their PBs on the platform. That's just not something that seems to happen reliably. So I think anyone who's been in the game a while, they stop betting on stars. They stop gambling, because the thing about gambling is it's a gamble, right? They start betting on consistency, and they make sure that they actually get stronger so that by the time they compete, worst case scenario, they're hitting a 2.5 or 5 kilo meet PR on their total. And if it was a good day, it might be 25 or 30. And then they know they're going to have more times on the platform. So I think that mentality is an important one. And it's very difficult to see that consistency and to have confidence coming into your meet if you haven't touched any singles, or if you just get like your openers 1 week out and they were a little grindy. Now you're afraid of your second attempts. And honestly, your second attempt should probably be a lock in most meets if you're doing your attempt selection in what I would say is an ideal way. So that's one thing I want to talk about is the benefit of consistency. You remove the false belief that you're going to have this big, huge increase from the taper. And I will say that it dampens the taper because you're not accumulating as much fatigue from doing a lot of volume. So what does decreasing volume look like when you're just doing, like in my case, 4-3-2 singles with 1 back offset? Well, next week it means lighter singles, 1 less each, and no back off work, So it's basically just a reduction in frequency. So I'm not expecting a huge return because when you're starting with a highly specific but low magnitude of stimulus, dropping off the volume a little bit, just basically working up to your last warm up and not doing the next single, you're going to feel better, but I'm not getting some kind of amazing rebound effect. So I would love to be able to put up, something approximating the best I did in each day, maybe plus 2.5 or 5. But I'm absolutely not betting on the taper. However, if I didn't take this approach, I would go into the meet not having squatted 200 and not having deadlifted 240. So I would have no confidence in those numbers either. So look at it's easy to look at this and be like, look, you're going to taper it at the same numbers. This isn't going to go well. And this may be a very different conversation if I bomb out at this meet and all of a sudden we have to not put out this episode. But I don't suspect that will happen. But let's say the alternative to that happening. What would I have done if I used like an abbreviated 6-week kind of linear peak? The most I would have hit, what I would be coming in today after this podcast to hit my heaviest numbers of the block, and it would probably be like 185, 135, and maybe 220, 225. And that'd be the heaviest number I hit during this cycle. I've done a lot of more volume. I'm tapering all that stuff. But before that, I'm doing a lot of 3s, 4s, and 5s in, basically 10 to 30 kilos less than those 3 numbers I just said. So my confidence, I will have smoked 185, I will have smoked 135, and smoked 225. So I know I can do those. And I'm maybe feeling good for a 5 to 10 kilo increase on my second attempt on all those, but I haven't actually done those. And I think, as anybody knows, as you get closer and closer to competition, anxiety gets away from you. And it's just not a good experience. And it also tends to punch you in the thinking part of your brain instead of just the doing part of your brain, where those motor patterns are best expressed, that unconscious competence. So I feel pretty good about the idea of going in and having those same openers, making 10 kilo jumps and knowing I've done these. I've done these in a fatigued state. And then going, all right, let's figure out what I got left on my third attempts. And then hopefully making the majority of those attempts, going anywhere from 7 to 8 to 9 out of 9, and improving on my total relative to what I thought might have been possible on week 4, week 5. So anyway, that's the consistency aspect. I think the other thing you talked about was the body getting beat up. The one thing we know about volume is it is literally like a volume dial on whatever you're trying to make happen. So if you are doing, let's say pull-ups, and you notice they're a great way to build your lats, but they also cause you a little bit of shoulder pain, you'll get more of both of those things. So if you do a crap ton of pull-ups, you're going to get more shoulder pain and you're going to get more lat development. And that will go until one of those impedes the other, right? So if you know that doing, a handful of sets of squats makes your hips achy, and you decide to go from a handful to a handful plus 5 more to a handful plus 8 more, or a handful plus 8 more plus 10 kilos more.
That was the program I was on, by the way, Eric, real quick, in 2014, the last one.
Absolutely. And that's the type of programming that led me to needing hip surgery in the first place. So we've all been there. This is something we all do. It's a manageable, niggle that would recover normally if we kept at a quote unquote moderate volume, that by the next time we did the movement again, or by next week. But we increase it because that's what we're supposed to do. So I think a better way to approach it is that the volume of a movement that you can recover those aches and niggles from should probably be your cap. And then you need to get creative. So again, some of the folks who I mentioned earlier who are just built to powerlift and are super resilient, they can increase the volume on those movements because they're not getting much on the quote unquote niggly side of things. But if that's not you, here's a practical example of this. So as my loads got higher and higher, and as my frequency got higher, in week 3 and 4, so 2 weeks ago and 1 week ago, I was up to doing benching every time I trained, 5 days per week, squatting on 4 days. So just having one day where I don't squat. And I noticed that from doing a relatively narrow grip, and I'm a tall guy, I'm 6 foot, so I have a relatively large wingspan, doing a low bar, narrow grip back squat, and then going to bench, my elbows were killing me. Like unloading the bar was painful. Loading up the plates on bench press was painful. Unracking was painful. Pausing on my chest was painful. And it was inhibiting my strength. I had a couple days where I was like, I think I could actually bench more if I wasn't distracted by the pain in my elbows and shoulder. So what did I start doing? Well, I started benching first and then doing squats second. Is that specific? No. But so what? Like what you have to often not ask, what does the textbook say I should do, but what's the best calculus for the moment? I'm in an intensity phase. I don't need a lot of volume, but I need enough load that when I squat before I bench, it messes up bench press. Now, I would rather actually get a chance to hit 10 kilos more on bench, but do it before squat than have a squat first because that's the order in the comp. Do I really think your squat is making your bench that much worse, or that benching first is making your squat that much worse afterwards? No, I think they're pretty negligible. They're very different movements. But if I do squat first, it hurts my elbows and my shoulders and my wrists. So anyway, that's one example, kind of audible I called. Another way to look at it also, and you talked about, and this is actually the third point I wanted to make, was the absolute load aspect, because I totally agree. And let's just keep it super practical. I'm not going to talk about how allometric scaling, and when you're getting stronger, there may be a point where an absolute load is a different experience, even if it's 80% for a novice or 80% for a super heavyweight elite level lifter. I think they are different, and I could make that argument, but let's just look at it from a very practical perspective. We'll use me and Bryce. So best case scenario today, I'm probably going to work up to like a 205 squat. If Bryce, on the same instance, be working up to somewhere between 325 to 340. So just from warm-ups, most lifters, based on the experience and the way they've trained for years, don't like to make more than, I'd say 20 kilo jumps once they get to a certain percentage of their one rep. And don't get me wrong, I normally go from like bar to 90 to 130 to like 150 to 170, and then I jump from there somewhere between 190 to 185, and then I go for what I think I have. But towards the end, I'm not going to make any more than a 15 kilo jump when I go from my heaviest warm up to what I consider I'm going for a max attempt, right? And let's say I was Bryce, that we maybe tick that up to 20 kilos. So that means Bryce has to get up to, if he does have 340 in that day and is calling it right, he's got to hit like a 315 or a 320 squat before he hits that 340, which means that before he hits the 315 or the 320, he's got to hit like 300. And before he hits 300, he's got to hit 270. And before he hits 270, he's got to hit 230. Those are all numbers beyond my max, right? So the absolute amount of work that he has to do is already higher. So as you get stronger, your number of sets, which of course at a lower load are going to contribute far less to strength, are still contributing something. So that's another thing I noticed, is that there is a natural increase in volume with strength. So absolute load does have a contribution, if just purely from the act of warming up on a day-to-day basis. So that also is going to have an impact on the joint positions you have to be in. If you get an achy back from being in a arched bench press position, or if it hurts your wrists, or like for me, if as I've been getting stronger and stronger and stronger, there's another warm-up set in there. That's just a little extra fatigue in my wrists and elbows when I'm doing a low bar. So I think these are all things we have to consider, that anytime we manipulate one variable to the extreme, whether that's volume in a volume block, or whether that is intensity in an intensity block, you necessarily have to decrease either or both of the other options, which are frequency and volume in the case of an intensity block, or intensity and frequency in the case, or volume and frequency in the case of an intensity block. I might have just said that wrong, but you get my point. There's basically a triangle. If you bring one up a whole bunch, you need to drop down one or two of the others. So in a volume block, if you're going to be increasing volume, you may need to consider, all right, I'm going to effectively decrease my intensity by just not doing all my volume on my main lifts. Or that's great. I can do a higher frequency of training this muscle group, but maybe not this movement by doing something like a belt squat or a leg press even, God forbid. So yeah, Max Ada actually said it really well when he was on. I think we had him on with Steffi Cohen, and we were talking about specific training, and he was saying like the dose of a single is the highest dose of stimulus you can get on any given set for strength. So it starts to close down other options. Like what are you going to do? So here's another thing I've noticed. So if I have a day where I hit it, like the day after I hit my 200 kilo squat, I felt a little more beat up than on days when I hit like a 180 or a 190, right?
Yep.
Makes sense. So also the days when I would choose to do my back off set, and you would think one set of 3 to 5 is not that much, but when I'm not that adapted to it, I actually notice it. So for example, this week on I think it was a Monday, I hit 147 on bench, and then I did a triple on 120 afterwards, right? So that was the heaviest I benched this block, and it was a relatively heavy triple afterwards. The next day, I could only do 140, right? Then I had a day off, and I came back, and I had a good single again. So it actually becomes a lot more predictable when there's less moving parts. If you have a good day, you almost know that because you expressed the vast majority of your strength, it's not going to go that well the next day. Not that I'm not open to it going well, and sometimes it does, but it's probably not. So when I hit that 200 kilo squat, if you looked at the pattern, I hit 190. The next time I felt like crap, I hit 180, and then I hit that 200 kilo squat. So the fact that I could only squat 180 actually meant that by the time my recovery curve fully came back, I was ready to hit that 200. So there's now almost an emergent pattern that comes from this. So I train 5 days a week, which is right now, which is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So when do I decide to do my back off sets, if you think about it? Well, it's probably going to be on Saturday and Tuesday because I have an extra 24 hours to recovery. So I don't have to basically eat a lower single. Now, sometimes with bench, I'm just doing more singles, and I don't really care if I have a few more days where I'm just not at my peak capacity. So if I hit a back off set on Monday, that's fine. I'm not expecting to hit a big single on Tuesday. So I could do 2 back off sets in a row and then just do a back off set on Thursday, eat a rough single on Friday. Maybe I had a good single on Thursday, and then hope for Saturday to be really good. I've accumulated more volume, but I'm thinking about when is it reasonable to expect my performance to be high. So that's kind of some of the calculus that goes into it. When you have such a high dose from each unit of volume, you also know that you're going to have a high dose of fatigue that's going to suppress your strength for a period of time. So anyway, that was a lot of rambling, but 3 really good points you made is the consistency aspect of knowing what you can probably do on the platform, even on a bad day, and actually, I want to talk about that a little bit. You get to know your 1 hour minimum too. Like we talk about our one rep max, but your 1 rep min, which we kind of talked about in, I think You're Not an Advanced Lifter, that episode, this is much more acute. We're not talking long term. But like the worst squat I've had in the last 3 weeks was a 180 at a 9.5, and I probably could have done like 182. So it means when I feel like crap, maybe I did deadlift volume the day prior, didn't get much sleep, I'm distracted, I mess up my walkout, I can still figure out a way to put a little, like right around 400 pounds up on a squat. Similarly, on deadlift, I think right now it's about 500, and my bench is like 300. So that's really useful information. If you take my worst case scenario single that I can do, and you add a taper onto it, now we're looking at somewhere around my first or second attempt. It kind of helps you get in the ballpark, and that's something that can build a lot of confidence. One thing when you do a ton of volume, you will notice that when you do singles, you're going to have much more variability in them. You're going to see, or if you do a really high frequency, like if you look at like daily max training, like I'm talking about, squatting 4 days a week up to a proximity of a max or 3 days per week. But there's studies like the one by Zerdos where every day for 39 days, they went for a max. And if you didn't rate it as a 9.5 or a 10, you got another set to do, right? And you would see big swings. Like it might be, a 450 squat one day, 500 squat the next day. And I don't see that kind of swings with me, probably because I'm not imposing that much stress. But you can easily impose a lot of stress from a ton of volume. Like if you did 5x5 yesterday on squats and based off an estimated 1RM of 200, do you think 200 is going to be your max the next day? It'll probably be like 175, So that's I think that's something that you can absolutely cause stress. I remember one specific day I was prepping with my high volume, high intensity, high frequency approach, aka let's get hip surgery, fun times. And I ended up pulling 250 at the meet I was prepping for, but there was one day where I missed 210. So just for everyone who doesn't know metric system, I pulled 551 on the meet, and there was a day where I think 210 is 463. Couldn't pull it. I got stuck at the top. That's really demoralizing, and it makes you question everything. It could have just been that was a bad day to deadlift on. In fact, I almost certainly think it was in retrospect. But that's the type of thing that can really be anathema to the mindset of a lifter as you're entering that prep phase. And you don't want that. One of the things that I would recommend, this is a practical application to this strategy. If let's say in the last 3 to 4 weeks you decide to hit a lot of singles at 9 to 10 RPE, don't miss. You want to, like I will often say when it comes to RPE based training that you want to have, and I'm echoing Mike to share here, you want to have an aggressive autoregulation mindset. So like, for example, if you think a 300-pound bench press last week was a 9.5 RPE, and let's say that's for 5, right? And you're supposed to go for a set of 5 at 9 this week, you have a couple options. You could go down because you overshot your RPE by half a point this week. You could stay the same and see if you could make that 9.5 a 9. Or you could make it the smallest load jump and see maybe I've gotten actually 10 pounds stronger and go to 305. The mindset you probably want to have, especially in developmental blocks with higher reps and more sets, not an ultra specific kind of block we're talking about, is probably on the aggressive side. Going down to 295 wouldn't be what I'd recommend there. Be like, let's see if you can make that 309 RPE. And maybe if you feel really good, go to 305. And the idea is that you're trying to push for progressive overload, but you're still trying to hit your RPEs. But if you are wavering on the fence, you want to jump. You want to go for it, right? Because it's easy to not be sure if a 5-pound difference could be a 9 or a 9.5 or 8 or 8.5. So there's no big deal if you accidentally hit 8.5. In fact, that's good. It's encouraging you to push your limits. And it's very difficult, to quote, I think, Arthur C. Clarke, to know what is the limits of possibility. You often sometimes have to venture into the impossible. So you will miss sometimes, especially in high RPE blocks. But that's not the mentality to take when you're 2 weeks out from a meet. When you're 2 weeks out from a meet, you want to get the heaviest single that you know is there. So, for example, I think it was just yesterday, I worked up to a 195 squat, and I finished it. And one of my students, Alyssa, who's a very, very good power lifter, and she was like, "I think you had 197, and maybe even 200." And I was like, "Yeah, but I don't want to. You think?" She was like, "I think 70% chance you would have had 197." And I'm like, 30% is a lot. I'm like 8 days out. I want to get the 195 and know it's there, because really, what do I gain from squatting 197 versus 195? Do we really think that's actually that much more of a stimulus? What I would gain is a little more confidence, but I've already squatted 200. So for me, I don't gain any more confidence from squatting 197 versus 195. But what it will take my confidence is if I take 200 and I miss it. And now I don't think 200 is a lock anymore. Like, oh man, maybe that was just a good day. Maybe that was a fluke. Maybe I misloaded it. Maybe I had 220s that were both actually 19 kilos on each side. It was actually 198, So I think that kind of perspective is important when you're using this approach. You want to get to that point where you are getting the most out of it without potentially getting the downsides of it shattering your confidence, for sure.
So much power there. And Eric, I'm going to say this. You know how I know you're a good coach? Because you're jacked. No, because you listen to your lifters. And this is actually being serious here for a second, because information can be useful. It's just information. It can be useful. It can also just be pure noise. But I think a lot of coaches who don't train the way they should attempt to fit a system to every single lifter. And it's almost like, I'm going to do it. They're like, damn it, we're getting back to critiques of capitalism here. Classical economists that would try and put a neat little system over something that's very dynamic. So it's like, human beings are rational creatures, therefore their buying choices or whatnot are going to be in their best interest. And then when you actually do studies, you find out that's simply not the case. It's like, wait a second here. I had this system, it was perfect, it was elegant in design, and it didn't pan out in reality. And I see often, not only, of course, the guru mindset that I have the system, I'm going to adapt you to the system, and it's not pliable in any way, shape, or form. But a lot of what we've been talking about here is instilling the lifter with confidence. And I'm not trying to give a nebulous term. You're like, oh, confident. What does that mean? Like how the person feels? Like, fuck your feelings. What I mean is that you want the person to have their assurance that what they're doing not only is working, but that, okay, I hit this number, to your point. You have two different systems. There's two different potential situations leading up to meet. You have someone not practicing singles, so they really don't know what they're capable of. So you think you're kind of venturing into the unknown, and that can be viable, but you're leaving a lot of questions up for grabs. What am I capable of on meet day? I don't know. And then we talked about the smaller taper, right? So the idea of you doing singles, you leading up to the meet, you kind of know it's like, yeah, I have that minimum, what I'm capable of for sure. So my minimum capability. And then on game day, it's like, man, based upon what I've been seeing, I should at least be able to hit that. And that instills a sense of confidence. You were even talking about, and that's where I do think aches and pains, and we joke about like, your feelings don't matter, or like, it's just pain, bro, like get over it, or just ignore it, like walk it off. But in reality, from a very practical standpoint, coming up with systems that are reliable, predictable, and they take into account human behavior are very powerful, where it's like, wait a second, if this person is thinking now, they're doing the program, and instead of adjusting the program, trying to find a movement, to your point, being a smart lifter and of course, coach, hey man, when I bench press after I squat, my elbows feel gnarly. Let me change that around, as opposed to like, no, this is exactly how you should be doing it. Because when you enter a movement, not even doubting that you can execute it, but thinking of anything other than the movement, that's a major drag, right? That's something that's going to bring down the total performance on that set. Whether or not, because now you have a conversation in your head, okay, I'm lining up for the squat. Yeah, I mean, this hip, man, I've been doing 3 weeks. Like, it's been high intensity, this volume block. We've had, myself and Eric, these conversations internally with ourselves, certainly when we're going through various parts of our lifting. And before you do this, set, you've just given yourself an entire novel, right? There's a novella there in your head you've had to go over before you do the set. And this isn't an individual overthinking. It's just more noise that's in the conversation now. And so we want the signal to be as high as possible, the fidelity of it to be as high as possible. And so I think sometimes that gets forgotten, where you want the lifter to have confidence in themselves, in their capabilities, and also adjust it to be dynamic so that depending upon the information they're giving you back in return. And sure, certainly we add the pain roundtable. Pain is information. It could be useful. It could be not useful. It could be telling you something. It could not really be telling you something. It could be miscommunicating something that you otherwise think that you have. It's not direct, but there are a lot of different signals that occur when someone is training. And if you don't pay attention to those, if you don't perhaps notice the patterns, or you self-organize towards either the program, the methodology, or whatnot, that you seem to get a better result to, what are you doing? And so I think the role of a good coach is to carefully guide the lifter to their best self, both by listening to their feedback, their subjective feedback, which is important, and then the coach having that overarching structure where they could see kind of a little higher up, a little bit more removed, and think, no, I think this is what you should do. And so to your point, as you said, Eric, like we're talking now about, the predictability, the outcome, and all those sorts of things. Yeah, like someone telling you, no, I think you had that. Like, yeah, 70% chance. What's that going to do for me? I hit it. I feel great. So that's good. That's the 70%. I might be a little bit more fatigued. And maybe that might even creep, not doubt in my head. Oh, that was really tough. Like come meet day, that might be all I got. Or an RP 9.5, where it's like, I could have done more and I feel good to go. And I knew I had it. So you're carrying that momentum of confidence. You missed that 1 week out, Eric, as you said, like imagine, wow, you go for that. So your last warm up, whatever, maybe it's like 185. So that's good. That's like your minimum. You're used to doing that. Now, 1 week out, your last single attempt, you missed. And now you're supposed to do a mini taper and hit some unknown on meet day. 2 different outcomes, man. So I think there's so much of importance that you said, but just to stress that, I think in the face of new overall information in the industry, some of the old guruism is kind of slipping away, where you see that less, where it's like, this is my system, I'm going to adapt you to the system. you can't do it. Oh, basically, it's the explanation is not me and anything that I'm giving you, and that feedback, that response that you get, that symbiotic relationship. No, it's on you. Like, you didn't sleep, you didn't execute it properly. Like, there's some neat explanation that absolves myself of responsibility, rather than being a tag team that's trying to go in there and mess shit up.
No, that's well said. I like how you kind of tied it back to the evolution of some of the coaching, I'd say the ideal coaching philosophies and partnerships that should exist. And I think they're important too, because one of the benefits to having a coach is they're able to keep their eye on the program and the goals of each phase of it without being influenced to the same degree by the emotions that you are, because you have a lot more emotional weight put towards this competition. You know, that can come from experience. You may not need a coach. That can also come from, maybe, one cool thing about this is that while I've made rapid progress in regaining strength, I'm not in a position where I'm going to hit lifetime PRs. There's a chance, considering I pulled 240, that I could put 252 up on my third deadlift on the platform. And that would actually be a 2.5 kg PB on the platform. So like that's possible. I don't think I'll be good for 152 on bench. I'm close. So there's still a possibility I could have a really good day on bench and deadlift, but I don't expect it. So because I know that I'm regaining strength and I'm getting on the platform, probably going to be 2 to 5 kilos under my best bench and deadlift, and probably at least 10 kilos underneath my best squat. There's less pressure. I am containing the meaning of this meet and what success is defined by as the context of having a 6-week prep after basically taking 3 years off, optimal powerlifting programming. So that's kind of freeing, but that's not there for a lot of people. So then you're in those two other camps. Are you experienced enough, and do you have the right mindset, perspective, and emotional relationship with lifting, where you can stay in the pocket, as my powerlifting contemporaries would often say, or do you have a coach to help you stay in the pocket? And the challenge of this specific approach that I'm talking about is that both in the beginning of it and in the end before the taper, it's easy to blink. So what do I mean by that? So when I squatted 145 on my first squat day and racked it and finished squatting after like 4 sets, like I did 70, 100, 120, 140, 145. That's all I did. I felt like I'd done nothing except maybe refamiliarize myself with the movement. The temptation would be, all right, cool, let me drop 5 kilos off and hit a set like 3 by 5. That's what the book says I should be doing, right? Same thing with bench. When I worked up to 115 for a single and stopped, I want to do more. I feel like I'm not doing enough. How could I possibly be gaining strength from this? But sure enough, the next time I trained, those same weights felt substantially lighter, because the last time I'd done a paused meet style bench and the last time I'd done a low bar back squat to depth, for the bench it had been a year. For the squat, it had been 3 years. So immediately, all of a sudden now I'm actually getting these adaptations just from relearning the movement. And taking that low-hanging fruit is a challenge, because we're built on an ethos of hard work. We've talked about this before. The way you get entrance into the Iron Game cult and the way you get respect from your peers is not having the biggest numbers. It's not having the biggest biceps. It's working really hard. So if I post up, and I'm posting my videos on Instagram, look, here's Eric. He had a 45-minute workout. He worked up to a single at a 5 RPE on 2 lifts and went, I'm prepping for a meet. Like, fuck this guy. That is the fear of. Yeah. Exactly. That's my fear of how those will react. That's even an internal voice in me telling me I'm not doing enough, right? Now, granted, I've also got some accessory work. I've got some things to please that inner demon. I got to do pull-ups and lateral raises and shit like that. But absolutely, in the first 2 weeks, it felt like I was not training hard enough. There was some novelty, and that curbed that. And like I said, I've got a little bit of other stuff. And it also felt easier. So I needed that proof in the pudding in workouts 2 through 10 in those first couple of weeks, just to be like, yeah, I'm doing very little, but I'm feeling myself getting stronger. Yeah, the objective numbers are going up, but they're submaximal. But man, these feel submaximal. Like, whoa, I just smoked the 170 squat. I might have been good for 190 right now. Reminder, you don't need to be squatting 190 right now. You got to meet where you want to start with a number that starts with a 2. So why would you squat 190 right now? And then similarly, there's a different type of needing to stare into the face of Cthulhu and not blink and stay in the pocket when you're in week 5 and when you're in week 4, where you have to go up for a max and you just did it yesterday, and you need to be okay with the fact that your max is 5 kilos less and you don't want to miss, like we talked about. So it takes self-regulation on both ends. It takes stepping outside of your ego, only squatting 140 when you could probably do 170, and going for 195 when you might have 200 in you because you don't want to miss, because it doesn't make sense to do so, even though yesterday you might have squatted more. Accepting now you actually are staring it in the face. It's not, oh man, I could have squatted 170 but I only did 140, that's easy, I should do more. Now it's, I have to come to terms with the fact that this is my max right now, and it's a different number than yesterday, it's a different number than tomorrow, and that means I don't have confidence that I'm going to put up a number on the platform that's exactly what I want. Like, Omar, if you ask me, well, what do you actually want to do on the platform? I would love to go 225 on the squats, you know? And the closer I get to the meet, and the more I realize that's not happening, the more I have to have my actions meet reality and accept the fact that, hey, best case scenario on a good day, it might be 215, you know? And that would be great. That would be amazing. But it requires self-regulation. It requires self-talk. It requires facing reality and having it not necessarily match my hopes in both that initial phase and that end phase. And I think that's where it's really valuable to have a coach, especially if you're not in a position like me where you're regaining strength and this is a very low stress meet. I don't have a lot of skin in the game, you know. Talk to me again 6 months into 2021 where I'm actually approaching meet PRs and I put 6 months of prep into it, and it will probably be very good for me to have somebody overlooking my training, and I will most likely outsource it. So I think that's just an important thing to consider in this process as well.
Eric, I just, for those listening in 20XX, I just want to thank when I say sponsor, I mean our controllers, Coca-Cola, for allowing us to do this episode, talk to the people for the people. We all now, in the future, we live on the same kind of compound. Yet no one has any personal possessions or anything like that. And when we say physical fitness, really, we're talking push-ups at that point in time. But it's nice that we're talking about squats now. We're talking about bench press. We're talking about deadlifts. There's a whole lot of information. And actually, I'm going to say this is a good... What's up?
Hey. So we're all living on the same compound,
but not doing
and there's no such thing as personal property. Yeah. This doesn't sound like a critique of capitalism. This sounds like the success of communism. So I'm confused. Like, which direction are we going here? Our followers need to have an extreme right or left position on economics.
Yeah, of course, most assuredly, and we will give that in next episode. Right? It's like we get asked all the time. Hey, who do you guys worship? Is it this guy Dave Draper or is it Paimon? And we say yes. Right? It's a very simple answer to a very simple question. So I don't see why they're confused. And if they're confused, once again, us being good coaches, Eric, what does that mean? It's on them. So shame on you, listener. Eric was talking about the low-hanging fruit, forbidden fruit. This has been Adam and Eric talking about lifting. It's a perfect point just to stop, I think, because it was succinct, Eric. There's a lot of information. It was a powerful episode. I mean, we had an episode recently that was damn near 3 hours. This one's about an hour 20. There's a lot to apply. If we gave any more information, it's kind of like, Eric, sometimes, coach, you take a look at someone's form, you see like 3 to 4 things that will probably make a difference that you want to tell them about. But you tell them one thing, because if you tell them the 3 to 4, even if you tell them 3 to 4, they're only going to remember the one thing. So,
or 0, which is more often the case. Yeah.
They regress. Yeah, I got a coach. They come back next week. You see them like, dude, how did you get worse in the week since I saw you?
Actually, I'm going to drop a little bit of published science on this episode.
Go.
Cool study on gymnasts. They gave one group 100% feedback, and the other group with what's called bandwidth feedback, where they accepted a certain bandwidth where their joint kinematics and kinetics differed from the elite level. So these are sub-elite gymnasts getting coaching. One group is basically the coach wrote, here's everything you did wrong, change it, make it better. The other group of coaches said, okay, only when these certain key flaws are made to a certain magnitude will I give you feedback, and only on those. And guess what? The bandwidth group made better progress in their gymnastics technical expertise. So this is why you don't give someone 900 cues to follow, while you don't get the report and be like, all right, here's the thing. Your macros are off, your step count's off. I think your mindset's a little weird. We need to work on your sleep. You misloaded. I think you should have this day on Tuesday. Oh, by the way, the video of your squat, here's 10 critiques. I made a separate PDF for that. Oh, on your deadlift, here's a separate PDF. I expect you to fix all that in 7 days. The only thing you can know for sure is that they'll feel bad and get none of it done. And then they'll feel even worse when you give them those same PDFs again the next week. So yeah, choose one or two things, give bandwidth feedback, and they will make progress.
You know, it felt oddly specific what you're saying with that feedback, though, if I'm being honest. When you're saying, I was like, oh, I think he's referring to me here. You know, often I'll notice, Eric, sometimes coaches will throw the illusion of complexity to instill confidence. Like, I'm your coach. Like, you're so wrong. Like, you don't even know how wrong you are right now. What was the person? Oh, man. I think this actually may have even been a meme. It could be very real in our fitness space. But someone, when they were asked a question, actually, I think this is real. I'm remembering the reference. But someone said, like, whatever, like, hey, like, how's my squat look? And the person, the coach, this esteemed coach, kind of like sighed. Where do I begin? Like, just this fatigued, belabored, holier than thou. Like, I do this all the time. I guess, yeah, I'm gonna make, you know, a diamond out of this coal here with enough pressure, I suppose. It was amazing.
Absolutely. I think we've all seen it. And we also know there's no better way to coach someone than with a condescending attitude of their inadequacy. Yeah. So that's how you motivate and change minds, folks. So we recommend that as the method. Yep. And Omar, I'll be sending you those 3 PDFs later today.
Now I have something to read as I'm, you know, just trying to fall asleep. It's going to be my ASMR. It's just going to be you reading those PDFs. And then when I once again regress and this is the weird part. I actually regress just so I could have the same PDFs to listen to. You thought you're giving me something useful. You're giving me a lifelong friend to listen to as I go to sleep.
And it sounds like it's improving your sleep quality. So once again, the answer is always, I'm the best coach in the world.
Man, Eric, where can people find you?
You can find me at bestcoachintheworld.com. Yep. You can find me on Iron Culture every Monday.
Sounds like a good podcast, if I'm being honest.
Well, I've got a pretty good co-host. Let me just say that for you.
Hey, Eric. And people, if they want to pick up the Muscle Strength Pyramids, they can go to thepyramids.com. That's, of course, where one would go to, right? Where they pick it up?
The Pyramids, yeah. You might want to go to muscleandstrengthpyramids.com, or you can just 5 blinks up from the other 5 products that are owned by the 2 mega corporations while I'm struggling to survive. But hey, in the future, I won that legal battle against Egypt, and that was the nest egg we needed to survive. The megalo corporate oligarchy, potentially communist and capitalist at the same time system that really doesn't make any sense. But enjoy the future.
It's dystopian. It doesn't have to. As long as it's depressing, they're like, I'm in. You know, that's the hallmark of any good science fiction. It doesn't need to make sense. You know, if you really think about Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, fantastic. I like the series a lot, but if you really think about it, like from a hard science standpoint, don't, right? Just don't. So don't think of our dystopian future that is going to be the future. Don't analyze it too hard. You're boring, okay?
Yeah, seriously. You don't respect art. Asking it to make sense.
Makes sense.
Come on.
What does that even mean? Anyways, we got to get out of here. If you want to make sense, you can leave some damn sense. You can leave your thoughts on iTunes. You can leave a comment. You can leave a review. Actually, you can't leave a comment without leaving a review, so you have to leave a review. And we know we're not going to tell you what you should give us out of 5, but Eric, what typically do you see when you read reviews? What's the star rating you typically observe from other people, just observationally?
Well, you know, probably a more important point is there's a virus going around right now that anytime you see a star rating, if you leave 1, 2, 3, or 4, your computer immediately explodes and shards of glass go into your eyes and blind you for life. So my advice, avoid that virus, hit that 5-star rating. Yeah. Just, you know, you can say in the comment whatever you'd like. That way, that's because we really do read those. Absolutely, as we spend most of our time doing. But we just don't want those shards of glass in your eyes. So just for safety, because we care about you, hit that 5-star.
Yeah, that's, Eric, thank you. That was a perfect explanation. And on YouTube, now we're getting like 40, 50 comments. So if you're listening on, Spotify, iTunes, and you want to leave a comment, like we said, in the future, we're going to have a place where we can aggregate those comments and we can interact with you. But for now, it's on YouTube. So go ahead, leave us a comment. We're back every single Monday. We'll see you then.